Continuing our grief journey. I personally did 45 straight days of grief, and I am continuing in the process, and I have learned so much in this process of intense grief. I'm Christy Bundakumara, Dr. B, psychiatric nurse practitioner. I own and run a large clinic here in Colorado Springs, but I also teach about mental strength. And what do I know about grief? Unfortunately, I am an expert in grief. In 2005, I lost my adopted son, Johnny, in a drowning accident. In 2016, I lost my son, Reggie. And just a little over a year ago, I lost my daughter, Maya. And that really triggered this 45 days of grief, because that third grief, it was so unexpected. So was the drowning, but with Maya's death, there was some anticipatory grief because she had the same disorder, but she was healthy. She was fine. She went to bed, "Good night, Mommy," and she never woke up. And I went into shock mode. And in this 45 days of grief, it was my way of kind of making myself start this grieving process, because it's just a start. There's no quick fix to intense grief. But I have identified 5 selves. That's right, like yourself. 5 selves that we should be working on in this intense grief. I have videos for all of them. Self-care is one. Self-regulation, that's being able to regulate your mental and emotional state, which is very hard in grief. Finding your spiritual self, and self-improvement. And today we're going to talk about self-movement, moving your body. Now, we don't really talk about this a lot, definitely not in grief. We always say, well, you have to process grief. You have to process trauma. And, we often think that means talking about it. And talking about it is helpful. But there needs to be something that is allowing it to move out of the body. So I'm going to merge some different thinkings, okay? Our bodies are made up of energy. Emotions are energy, okay? We know this. Eastern religion and Eastern medical practices often talk about the energies of the body and actually treat things based on those energies of the body. We don't talk about that too much in Western medicine, but we do know that there is some truth to, we know that the things that make up each of us individually are the same. We know that there is a process that is happening that, we've studied the process. We have tried to communicate it. But one of the things that I'm realizing, and I know Eastern medicine talks about this a lot, is that many things are spiritual or energetic, but if they're not dealt with on that level, they become mental health or emotional. And if they're not dealt with on that level, they become physical. And I talk a lot about this intense grief. If we don't move it out of the body, it will come up in physical symptoms. And I'm currently being worked up for some physical responses to things. And, I talk about this in the self-care. We've got to take care of ourselves. We are an energetic entity. And emotions are energy. And they also can get stuck in the body. And we know this from a physical standpoint as well. Physical therapists will talk about this, that, that emotions get stuck in the fascia of the muscles. And so we know that even Western medicine talks about this as a science. We know that emotions get stuck in the body. But how do we move them out? Everyone talks about processing, move them out, but then they use words like release, let go. It's not that easy in intense grief. You can't just let go of the pain of losing a child. You just can't. And so how do you actually do that? there needs to be some movement, and that's why self-movement is part of the 5 selves. Now, oftentimes, like someone who loves to exercise will be like, oh yeah, running is my therapy. I can just, be feeling some kind of way, go for a run and feel better. Yes, that's working for them. That's their truth. I hate running. It's not going to, I'm just going to be pounding the negative into my body if I try to use running, someone else's truth, for my movement and process. So let's talk about what we mean by movement and process. So our body has a natural process, right? We know this from science, from our physical standpoint. We consume things, food, toxins, different things, we consume them, right? Either through eating or through our skin, but we're consuming things on a regular basis. Our body knows how to metabolize that. Then it excretes it out of the body. And if your consumption of positive is greater than your consumption of negative, and your metabolism and excretion is working properly, your body can regenerate. We know that cells can regenerate, but it takes a long time. And if you consume a toxin, whether it be your skin, through eating, whatever it is, if you consume a toxin, it might take 7 years of healthy eating to metabolize and excrete that out of the body and the cells be able to regenerate. Okay? So we're not talking about a process of, it's not just what we think, oh, I ate today, I have a bowel movement tomorrow, that's the process. No, that's so much more complicated than that. And so is the process of movement of emotions out of the body. You are not going to be able to just go for one run and now you feel better for a long period of time. Okay? But the process of emotions is also natural and can be done on its own. But what happens in our physical bodies when the consumption of toxins is higher than the consumption of positive things, positive nutrients, sleep, sunlight, and the toxins are more. Stress is a toxin, not just, physical things that you think of. All of those are toxins, right? If that is heavier than how fast our body can metabolize and excrete it, our cells will not be able to regenerate and disease will occur. Same is true of our emotional releasing and moving outside of the body. We have constant input, right? Right now you're dealing with some intense grief and it feels like literally the only input, but you've had input your entire life, positive and negative input your entire life. The same as with food and toxins. If there's more negative than there is positive, it's hard to keep up with the processing and releasing. And nobody talks about how do you actually process. We talk about thinking about it, right? Maybe talking to a friend, talking to a therapist. Though that is movement, by the way. Okay? But what is not movement is rumination, where you just sit in it and you're thinking and you're just creating a negative and a negative and a negative, and you're not trying to move the negative out and bring in positive. But you have to bring in positive to move that negative out as well. So the natural process should be, we have inputs of both positive and negative. We process the negative and release it. And that is where healing is happening. But it's a long process. Intense grief and loss is like you just drank poison and now your body has to recover. It could take years. It will take years in intense grief. And it'll take years of actively doing it. So Movement is not just physical, but it can be physical. But you want to make sure you have that intent in place. I don't like running, but I do like walking. And so I'll get on the treadmill and just try to process, just like feel the pain, try to move it out, like setting that intention that I'm not just walking for exercise, I'm walking to try to remove this from the body. And if you think about your life and your life purpose as like, and we're going to have a link to this choice opportunity, but if you think of your life as like this ball this big ball that you're trying to push forward, okay? And you're pushing it and you're pushing it and things happen and you kind of get, an obstacle, and you regroup and then you just keep pushing, right? Things in motion stay in motion. But then when something big happens, like intense grief, losing a child, losing a husband, like, or multiple littler things, right? Like the weight of the ball is like you're trying to push it up a hill and you're going backwards. And this is why we experience depression and all of these things that happen with intense grief. At that point, it's time to stop because the input, remember that process? The input is more negative than what is being released. And to keep something in motion in a positive direction, we've got to stop the negative momentum, right? Because that negative momentum could crush you. I have many people that I have talked to that are like, I am dead emotionally and mentally since losing my child. I have nothing left. That is that ball, that input being heavier than the positive. And so we have to stop. And the first goal is not to move that ball forward, but it is to stabilize it. Like stop letting it move you backwards. And I know the pain feels unbearable, but you can do it. You can move some of these things outside of the body, and it's just maybe a little bit at a time. It's not, one walk, one run is not going to do it. Finding different things. I've used tuning forks in my meditation, which is like a vibration. Music has vibration, but make sure you're bringing in vibration that is positive. Because oftentimes when we're depressed, we listen to depressing music, which has a depressing vibration. So then you are energetically taking more negative energy. So if you're going to use music, make sure you're using positive music. Make sure you're finding movement that you actually enjoy. And this is why I talk about the running thing, because someone else's truth might be that running saved their life. For me, I hate running. I don't like cardio at all. But I have found things that move for me. A hot sauna, a jacuzzi, walking on the treadmill, taking a gymnastics class, taking a dance class, things that bring me joy and move, okay? And not always, like when I'm at gymnastics, I don't necessarily go in with the intention of releasing something. But when I come up to a challenge and I'm like, I can do this, I can bring this positive energy, and let go of some of the self-doubt, okay? So when we say process, we're talking about moving it out of the body in a slow but consistent manner. We like a quick fix, but your metabolism, just initial metabolism takes 24 hours. Some metabolism takes years, and toxin removal sometimes takes up to 7 years. Just so if you're just thinking about it from a physical standpoint. And I could say if you actively worked through your grief for 7 years, you could get that ball rolling and exert some force and move the momentum in a positive direction. Find purpose in your life. But before you can find purpose, you have to find your truth. And that's what I'm talking about when I talk about these 5 selves. Yourself. I remember the first thing that hit me when I lost Maya is I'm no longer a mother. Who am I? And again, that's a negative thought, but also it challenged me to find my truth. What is truth? Who am I? And I'm not talking about the truth. I'm talking about your truth. What do you need to do for self-care? What do you need to do to self-regulate your mental and emotional state? What do you need to do for your spiritual self? What do you need to do to improve yourself? And how can you do self-movement, okay? Not always physical exercise. It could just be, like active meditation where you're moving. Yoga is a beautiful way. And there's grief yoga classes, there's trauma yoga classes. Like this is taking that energy and moving it out of the body. There's also energy practitioners that do some of that work. And so again, finding the help that you need to move this out of the body with the expectation that it is going to take some time. Intense grief is intense. It changes everything about you. But don't lock down. And this is why it's called self-movement. Don't lock down and not do anything. It's about taking action. An action of movement. And not all movement is gross movement, right? Some of it is mental movement. Okay? That's why talking to a therapist that won't let you ruminate and trying to get you to move forward is a type of movement. But so are other things that we do. I in the grief documentary, you'll see I did what we call a weeping walk. And I went to where my kids went to school. And I went to dolphin therapy where they did dolphin therapy. And I walked around and I physically let some things go or released a little bit of those emotions. Remember, that natural process is input, input, input. Process through movement. Release a little bit at a time. It's not, letting go is the wrong word. That's obviously a trigger word for many of us, but it's not about letting go of the whole incident. It's about releasing some of that pain. And that is what is going to provide healing. Being committed to the whole process. And we can't, if we don't process this, it will likely get stuck somewhere in our body, and mental and emotional symptoms could arise, or even physical symptoms. And I believe I'm experiencing some of that now. And that's okay. That's why you go back up to that self-care. If you've got symptoms, take care of them. Take care of yourself. Self-care, self-regulation, spiritual self, self-improvement, and self-movement is the keys to healing from grief. We can do this. I believe in you. I believe that you are mentally strong.